Well, hello and welcome to Christian Concern Live. It's great to have you join us here. If you're on YouTube or on Facebook, do give us a like and follow us. And we look forward to hearing from you. You can comment on YouTube and comment on Facebook as well. And we look forward to picking up some of your questions as well as we go through here. And we're just using this as a forum to chat through some of the stories that have been going on this week, and we've got a special guest today, one of our key clients whose case we had judgment this week. So joining me today, we've got Andrea Williams, our chief executive and founder. It's great to have you here, Andrea.
Good
great
to be with you.
And we've got Roger Kiska as well, one of our lawyers for the Christian Legal Centre, joining us from his home over in Europe. And we've also got Christian Hacking. Welcome, Christian.
Hello.
Great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. And we wanted to start really by talking about your case, Christian, which we had a judgment come down today. Maybe, Andrea, you want to summarize the case for us and then ask Christian something about it.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Christian. Hi there. CBR UK is this amazing organisation that goes out on the streets, just one element of its work, to really educate the public about the reality of abortion.
Oh, you just gone mute. I think we lost Andrea's sound there, but still echoes as well from you, Andrea. Now that's better. So, Christian, let me ask you about the case myself. Listen, so you were involved in putting up some posters to protest about Stella Creasy and her abortion policies. Can you tell us why you wanted to object to Stella Creasy? What were you upset about with what her proposals are, what her policies are?
Yeah, so just a bit of general background here. So CBR UK stands for the Centre for Bioethical Reform UK. In 2019, in the kind of full time, we went to Walthamstow. We were invited by a resident from Walthamstow to help educate Waltham Forest residents on the reality of abortion, and in particular what their MP, Stella Creasy, Labour MP, was pushing for, which is she's pushing for the decriminalisation of abortion, which effectively will strip unborn children of all rights up until 28 weeks gestation. So our plan was we went into Walthamstow with two images, one with Stella Creasy on it, and then another with a visual image of a 24-week aborted baby girl. And the slogan above the banners said, "Your MP is working hard to make this a human right." And it's basically it's taken from Stella Creasy's own speeches, in which she's constantly making a human rights case for women's rights, which in effect is a human rights case to take away the rights of other human beings, being unborn children. So the context was, we went there, we contacted the police before we went there. Stella Creasy was aware of our plans. We recruited peaceable volunteers of character.
So you got permission, did you, from the police ahead of time?
Well, you don't need permission
right.
to make a protest within the United Kingdom under our freedom of speech rules.
Right.
But as a courtesy, we always contact the police. We always make them aware of our plans, and we always ask them to uphold our right to display accurate, scientifically verified and reasonable images in the public square, things that people need to see. And so we came out that day. The police were there as requested, and they were.
Let me say, is it just one day, or had you been displaying these posters for a while, or you know, because obviously there's one day which was focused on, but did it all just only happen on one day? Had the poster only been up for one day?
So the run up to this was a campaign that was going to be displaying this image over a period of time. The idea was to saturate the saturate Walthamstow with the reality of abortion. The week before, a billboard had gone up with a majestic image of I think it was an 8-week living fetus in the womb. That had been removed already through pressure of MP Stella Creasy. And then we came out with this graphic image. And it was at this point that the full force of council powers fell upon us. Within of about 15 minutes, I'd been issued a community protection warning, which is a kind of a modern ASBO kind of legislation. Within of half an hour, I'd actually been dished out a formal community protection notice, which wasn't just preventing me from showing.
How did they communicate those to you? What, the police gave you those? How did they communicate those to you?
So this is one of the controversies of CPM powers, is that it doesn't need to be administered by police. It can be administered by council officers or anyone who's undergone some kind of training. What was interesting about the trial is it exposed that the people administering these CPNs had no substantial freedom of speech training. Actually, this was the first experience they'd had of a political natured protest. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know.
Can they just issue you with one of these things like without any discussion, without any consultation?
So they need to. So in their own minds, they need to deem that the behaviours are three things. Firstly, the behaviour is detrimental. Secondly, the behaviour is persistent, and thirdly, the behaviour is unreasonable. But other than that, and these are incredibly subjective terms. But there is no real hard and fast protocol or test before these CPNs can be administered. And so within of half an hour, I tried to talk with them. I tried to give them the legal documents that we had, basically proving our right to do what we're doing. They didn't read them. They weren't interested. All they were interested in doing was getting these images off the street. And so they gave me a CPN, and then moments later they started ripping down our banner and confiscated it, which in the court they admitted was an illegal act. They overstepped their powers. They had no legal kind of authority to do such a thing. And so it was such a unreasonable, frenzied response. They gave all their weight to the hecklers. There were one or two that were kind of stirring up the crowd. And they rode roughshod over freedom of speech, and then they effectively stole our property. So what's happened?
So tell us about what happened in court there. I mean, as in what does the judgment say then that came out this week?
Yeah, so the judgment came out yesterday, and the judge I think he said something to the effect that he's anxiously kind of sat on it, and he's concluded that he is upholding this CPN, that our behaviours were detrimental, unreasonable, and persistent, and that he feels Woolham Forest Council acted proportionally to these images and to the removal of these. Well, to the issuing of the CPN, he kind of sidestepped the illegality of the removing of the images, and then he also adds in just kind of these slightly frustrating kind of personal opinions, are dotted throughout his judgment, stating things like our image shouted at people, and that our image had an incredibly long-lasting detrimental effect on a couple of the witnesses. And so he's basically upheld it, which means effectively if I was to go back to Woolham Forest at this stage with a large image of a living or dead fetus, then I could face criminal charges.
So I want to ask Roger then. Roger, what's the legal perspective on this? Because don't we have protection for free speech? And I understand that this has been ruled to be political speech, which has even higher protections. Can you just talk us through the legal protections that Christian has in this?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The judge did rule this to be political speech, and rightly so. The European Court of Human Rights, which interprets the Human Rights Act 1998, has called it political speech. It said that the belief, the right to hold and express pro-life beliefs is also protected under Article 9, freedom of religion. And what that means is that speech enjoys the highest level of protection. So there's a strict level of scrutiny that the judge has to follow. So the only way you can interfere with that right is for compelling reasons. And I don't think that the reasons here were compelling enough to do so. I think that the jurisprudence in Strasbourg, cases like Anand v. Germany, suggests that you have the right to shock, offend, and disturb, that this is an issue of great public importance. I mean, we've had 9 million abortions in the United Kingdom. What could be a greater issue of importance than that? And that if you want to raise special attention to it in a manner that words can't do, images will do that for you. So the fact that it might cause some short-term shock and offense is foreseen by the case law. And I think it was the wrong judgment. I think a strict scrutiny approach would make it clear that this is protected speech. Other jurisdictions across Europe, precisely with CBR and these types of images, have upheld the right to use those images. So the UK is fully out of step here on that.
So,
and I think that to make, I think to make this, it's good to be back. I hope I stay back on. The echo is gone.
It's good to have you back.
Great to be here, and good to stand alongside you, Christian. It's amazing to work with your group and to see your faithfulness now over so many years, and your heart not just for the unborn children, but for the women as well. And I know that you come alongside many of those women, not just the ones perhaps who are considering abortion, but those who've had abortions, that come to your organization and speak about their sadness and their regret. And you're building such testimony around the work that you do together with Andy Stevenson, Ruth Rawlinson, Dave Brennan, Aisling Goodison. Incredible work bringing to the public's attention the reality of abortion. And I think to have the district judge there say very clearly, and now clearly down in black and white, that this was political speech. He said that at paragraph 26. I think that stands CBR in a very strong position when it comes to appealing this case. And therefore, it's going to be a case to watch in terms of political expression, what it means to be free to speak. Now, it's true that Christian in the witness box said, those images distress me. Those images are harrowing. They're horrific. They are graphic. That's
Christian
exactly what they
that,
are.
Did he? Oh, he did
yes,
say
he
that.
Did. Yes, he did. Of
Christian
course,
himself said that.
Yes, because they are.
Oh, right. Okay.
So the point is this: of course they are. They are to me. If any of us ever get used to an image of an aborted baby at 24 weeks, if we ever say that's anything less than horrific and disturbing, if we become desensitized to it, then we have to question our own humanity, our sensitivity. Part of the point of the images is to say this horrifies, but if it so horrifies, then we have to question them. So why is it legal? We hide it because it's horrific. We sanitize it, men and women in white coats behind doors so that you do not see. We use language, we use words that say, this is just a blob of tissue. No, it's not. Here it is. Here's the picture. It's a human being. And not just at 24 weeks, at 18 weeks, at 16 weeks, at 10 weeks, at 8 weeks. And there, in this last couple of weeks during lockdown, we've had this extraordinary U-turn by the government to say that women can access pills through a telemedical advice, like the one, a little bit like we're doing right now. They'll speak to a doctor and say, please send me a pill. The first one to kill the fetus, the second one to export.
I want to ask Christian, give us some historical perspective on this, using graphic images or offensive images for political campaigns. Can you sort of draw some historical context for us into this?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Just before I do, I just totally agree with what Andrea is saying, and comforted by Roger Kiska's analysis from Europe. I mean, the two, just to push back on what has already been said, the judge stated that the images were graphic, upsetting, sickening, disturbing, anxiety-inducing, frightening, and horrific. These are all words that he used. Now we're not, as a compassionate dude, I agree with him. These images are all those things. The question is, if that is what the visualization of abortion does to people, then surely there's something wrong with abortion. And that's exactly the question that needs to be posed. And ironically, the judge, who in the first paragraph stated, this isn't about the rights and wrongs of abortion, then gives this absolute indictment of what abortion looks like. And so the questions we need to be asking is, if this is so horrific, why why is Stella Creasy pushing for it, and why is the abortion closing it up? And the follow-on question is, if the UK is so informed about abortion, why is its visualization in the public square causing such a visceral reaction? Clearly, there's a disconnect between what we think abortion is and what abortion actually is, which really vindicates the reasonableness of our cause. But going back to this,
the historical perspective.
Yeah, the question you raised. Well, amazingly, in the court case, we barely had to delve into history to make a case for this. In September of 2015, the tabloids were splattered with the picture of the dead Syrian boy Alan Kurdi. That was issued to the general public without preliminary warnings, signs on doors or before news vendors. It was just issued for everyone to see. That image was shocking, horrific, offensive, especially amongst those who have young children, especially amongst those who have lost young children. But the point is that image was necessary because it was bringing home to the public the reality of the migrant crisis at that time, which is the negative emotional impact of an image has to be weighed against the benefit of public opinion and morality at large. And so that's just from 2015. I can raise with you, the use of graphic images to prevent smoking related diseases, both
by the government. That's by the government, that, isn't it? Yeah,
that's by the government. And why do the government do it? Because the government are making a cost-effective analysis. They're saying we need to save lives, we need to save the NHS money, and so therefore we are willing to negatively impact the emotions of smokers and smokers' children and smokers' partners to galvanize that kind of heart rift that leads to changes of behavior.
And I think as well on that one, I mean, what's a very fascinating one is there was actually a campaign, I think it was in 2012, where it was encouraging women to stop smoking when they were pregnant and showing the harm that it could do to the children in the womb. So there were a series of images of children in the womb. Do not smoke because of the harm that it can cause to your child in the womb. These very same children that we also abort. So that was, I think there's an irony in that. We don't join up these various ironies, how we want to save lives on the one hand, but when they're inconvenient or wrongly timed or unwanted, then abortion seems to be the solution.
But there's further history than that, isn't there, as well?
Absolutely. I've only scooped the top of the ice cream with a teaspoon here. If you want to go into social reform history, if you want to go to the abolition of the slave trade, the abolition of slavery in America, if you want to go to the ending of apartheid or ending of segregation in the States, if you want to go to Vietnam War, the Congolese genocide, every single one of these movements had iconic and upsetting images that helped change hearts and minds. Even secular historians agree that perhaps the start of the civil rights movement was the gruesome murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till, who, as Christians, was saved the previous summer, and yet his gruesome passion of a death and led to such a exposing of racism in the States that led to not only inspiring Rosa Parks and her bus tour 100 days later, but also that subsequently inspiring Martin Luther King Jr. So images have always been used to arrest public opinion and to guide public morality. Yeah.
So Roger, what has been prohibited now by this ruling, and talk us through the appeal as well? I mean, he's still allowed to hand out tracts and leaflets and brochures and things like that. Is that right? That's all very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to remember this is a very, very. It's a lower court judgment, so it doesn't hold presidential value. It's very fact specific, and the only prohibition that was upheld was holding a specific dimension of the photograph in that public square. So the image itself hasn't been banned, and that's important. The image itself has been deemed to be public or political speech. And if you go back to the Human Rights Act, that's one of the two articles, interestingly enough, the other one being freedom of religion, that enjoys a higher level of scrutiny. So the judges are told if it's a case that triggers freedom of expression that you have to pay extra care to the judgment. So this case is very appealable. There's a lot of presuppositions you have to accept for you to agree that the interference was lawful. And I think reasonable minds can come to different conclusions. I think we have a very strong case on appeal, and rightfully so. If you go to the United States Supreme Court judgment in Carhart v. Gonzalez, that was a case dealing with late-term abortion, and you read that judgment, which is a very, very graphic description of late-term abortion, which is what this image is showing, I don't see a difference other than there's a visual, a visual image in one. But in the judgment, it's so detailed that you can picture what's happening. So if the Supreme Court of the United States can do that, why can't we do that for the public in the UK?
Well, I would suggest one difference, which needs to be greater exposed in this particular case, which is the meddling of leading politicians in the public affairs of their constituency, and indeed in the criminalization of those who are holding them to account. I think the judge, John Radway, was far too quick to push that aside as being kind of superfluous.
Yes, I don't.
I think there's a lot more going on, and my hope is if we get a High Court appeal that we can start getting some of those emails and correspondences behind the scenes into the public square, so people can see who's working behind the scenes and why they are working so hard to silence the reality of abortion from the public square.
Yes, because if we do go to,
I mean, that's the thing. It's the big deal about this, silencing actual political speech on a political issue, Andrea.
Yes, well, I think that if it would be great if we can go behind the scenes, because certainly if we have the appeal, it would look like in this particular matter it would go to a full rehearing, so a full retrying of the evidence. But I think that we don't even necessarily, Christian, need the emails, although they would be useful to see. Because the reality is this, that Stella Creasy, the MP for that constituency, who's avidly pro-abortion and extremely pro-abortion in terms of the liberalisation of abortion, but she was all over Twitter. She was on the floor of the House of Commons talking about being harassed. She was being harassed by the reality of what abortion is. Abortion protest itself. That's what she felt. She wasn't being harassed by the people. When her abortion policies were being exposed on the ground in her constituency and causing some feelings of discomfort for her because people were being awakened to the reality of what it was, she pushed back hard on social media. We know that she pushed back hard with the journalists that she is friends with. We know that she pushed back hard by creating a victim story for herself on the floor of the House of Commons, and all of this is entirely.
And she got the poster company to take down the poster, didn't she? I mean, there's a political poster here criticizing her policies, and she gets the poster company to take it down. I mean, how does that work in terms of political speech? It's extraordinary.
I would say
that was a picture with a live fetus on it, was it not, Christian?
Sorry,
that was a picture with a live fetus on it.
Yeah, so that was the images of a live fetus at 8 weeks from fertilization, not last menstrual period. And yeah, she hit the airways immediately. And then the Clear Channel, who agreed after consultation to put up the image, took it down and apologized, even though the Advertising Standards Agency had already signed off the image as being okay.
So how does this work? A politician interfering with political advertising? It's extraordinary, isn't it?
I would add that Stella Creasy is, the fact that she is using her elected position in a democratic society and the tools of rule of law to silence your democratic right to speech and to silence any opponent of killing of unborn children should shock and offend us all. That is as anti-democratic as it comes.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I think we need to move on in the interest of time onto another topic. Thank you very much, Christian, for joining us on that.
Thank you.
Yes, I really want to say thanks, Christian, and thanks to CBR UK for your extraordinary work. We stand with you. You're amazing.
Thank you to the Christian Legal Centre. Without you, we would be twiddling our thumbs in a ditch. So thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Christian.
You. Great. We look forward to the appeal. Roger, there's an important case being heard in the court this week. Christian Institute case, I think it is, of an adoption agency, Christian adoption agency called Cornerstone. Talk us through the implications of that case for us as well.
Yeah, Cornerstone is a foster and adoption agency. So first and foremost, it's a Christian ministry. So it provides foster care services to evangelical Christian families. So in order to foster, you have to sign a statement of faith. And it's been incredibly successful. So they always foster with an aim to permanence. 80% of those that of the children that have been fostered have been gone through successful adoption procedures. And not once in the 20-year history of Cornerstone has there been an issue with an adoption. They've all come to completion. So first and foremost, they provide an invaluable service. Secondly, they are a Christian ethos organization. They are a ministry. And this is something that the government struggles to understand, that just because you're not standing behind a pulpit on a Sunday morning does not mean that you can't be engaged in ministry work. So the history of Cornerstone is ultimately emblematic of the struggle of Christians in the UK currently to enjoy their freedoms. So they had existed for a number of years before 2007, when the sexual orientation regulations and really the beginning of the equality agenda entered the United Kingdom, and the EHRC, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, first queried them, challenged them on their position that they weren't adopting the same-sex couples. So that was their first legal issue. And I would ask, what human right particularly is the EHRC trying to defend? Is it the rights of those?
So Roger, can I ask you though, because some years ago now, all the Catholic adoption agencies were closed down, weren't they? Because they weren't willing to place children with same-sex couples, and which is a shocking, awful thing. Why close down adoption agencies for that reason? But still, there we are. That happened. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that. But how did Cornerstone carry on then when these Catholic agencies had been forced to close down by the government? That was as long as 10 years ago, was it not? It was
with Cornerstone had their first case in 2008. It wasn't a case. It was just an issue with the EHRC, and EHRC was satisfied that they were a religious organization and they moved on. Whereas the adoption agencies, unfortunately, the vast majority of them, I think 13 of the 14 that existed at the time, were either forced to close or secularize. Then a few years later, Cornerstone again had issues with the Charity Commission, who didn't understand why they weren't adopting to same-sex couples. They dealt with that. They showed that their charitable objectives were to serve a Christian ethos, and they were satisfied with that. And then comes Ofsted, which is the latest struggle, who downgraded them despite their outstanding work on the sole basis that they don't provide services to same-sex couples. And there's just, again, a fundamental misunderstanding of what a Christian ministry is. So the problem is that when we push Christian ministries like Cornerstone outside of the public,
because they don't provide adoption services to Jews or Muslims or atheists or all sorts of people, correct, isn't it? They're not singling out same-sex people. They're just purely for evangelical Christians who abide by a certain confession of faith, which is central to their ethos. I mean, is that right?
That's exactly correct. And so you've got Cornerstone going through three different hoops. You've got them going through the EHRC, then the Charity Commission, and then Ofsted. And this, again, is emblematic of the struggle of Christians. Why would a Christian ministry providing such an invaluable service have to struggle so much just to maintain its ethos, despite the fact that they are providing such a valuable service? And we've seen this over and over again. The Christian Legal Center represented Eunice and Owen Johns a number of years ago, wonderful foster carers who were denied the right, the privilege of fostering simply because they held traditional views about homosexual behavior, Christian views. And
interestingly, in that case, the Equality Commission, when it intervened, said that the Johns' Christian faith would infect a child. That was something that actually was written down in terms of their submission. It was very negative. I mean, that was later in many ways used against them. But this represents the kind of thinking behind these organizations and the way, sadly, in which they understand Christians. There's a lack of understanding. There's a Christian illiteracy. They don't understand what it means to really live out faith.
And we've seen this over and over again. We had a case more recently with another foster caring family who eventually were able to adopt, but they were doing an amazing job with 3 kids that came from a family that had significant drug issues. The family themselves were happy with these fostering parents taking on the adoption. Yet the local council took issue with the family because they suggested that a child does best with a mom and a dad, not unlike Richard Page in his case when he was removed as a magistrate. So just holding the belief that a child does best with a mom and a dad in modern Britain is enough to keep you from fostering children, enough to keep you from the magistrate office.
So just talk to us about Richard Page, because I think that not everyone will be familiar with that case. Maybe Andrea, you'd like to talk about that one.
Well, Richard Page is an amazing man who's lived a life full of public service, worked in the NHS for most of his life in the financial audit part of the organisation. Extraordinary, publicly servant-hearted, 20 years or so as a magistrate, and working also on the family bench. Had a case a number of years ago where the issue was the adoption of a small child. The foster parents of that child hoped that they were a married mum and dad. They wanted to adopt this particular child, but it had already been approved that the child should be placed into a same-sex household. Richard Page, behind closed doors, with his fellow members of the bench, said that he felt that the child would do best to go to the married mum and dad that he was currently with, that children do best with a married mum and dad. And for saying those things, he was then reported. He was reported within the Magistrates Association, then reported within the judicial system. Eventually, for speaking about, he was then given a reprimand by the Lord Chief Justice and the Lord Chancellor as a result of what he'd said for discriminating against homosexuals. And when that went public, he spoke to the media about it, and as a result of that, lost his position as a magistrate.
Wow. So, and we've published a book, of course, haven't we, about same-sex parenting research, which shows that actually that covers like an analysis of 400 studies showing that children do better on average with heterosexual parents. I mean,
I think another thing that's incredible about Richard Page is that because he had been through that, and because the press came to him when they saw on judicial notices that he had been reprimanded for his position on this. He then spoke to it about the press. He went on, he was asked a number of times to speak about this to the press. And later, he was the National Health Service, where he was on the board of trustees, a non-executive director, a homosexual member of staff of that trust, who ran a Stonewall group, a support group within the NHS Trust, reported him and said that service users of the trust would fear coming in to be served by the trust, fear coming in for health issues if they knew that he was on the board. And as a result of that, he was effectively removed from the board. So for even speaking about this, he was then removed as a non-executive director of the Medway Trust. So that was an extraordinary thing that happened as well to him.
So Roger,
position. How many of the people watching today have said, "I'm not going to go to an NHS service provider because someone who's a non-executive member of the trust"? It's just unbelievable.
But I think what I also want to say is this: because of these cases, the issue remains in the public discourse, and I think this is very important. And very often, Roger, I think at the Christian Legal Centres, we sometimes call them the unknown clients. We have had wins, have we not? Because when we can get in and persuade people, usually early in the process, that they are discriminating against Christians, or that these Christians will be really good parents, or that this Christian teacher is a brilliant teacher, and you should respect their viewpoint, or that this magistrate is fair and just. When we can get in early enough, we very often can save people's jobs, and the employers don't want the trouble. So I think we need to keep on making our case and keep on contending, because for sure the truth in the end is also going to prove us right. And that's why it's so important that we stand.
And Roger, just back to the Cornerstone adoption case that Christian Institute is running today. What do you think the implications are of this case, and how do you think it will go?
And the legal question being asked is certainly very, very important, and that is whether one of the schedules of the Equality Act, which provides exemptions for religious organizations, applies to fostering agencies and adoption agencies or other service providers for that matter. So the real question is, how is ministry defined? Is it just someone who is behind the four walls of a church, or is it a greater ministry? And I think if they lose that case, that will be a huge damaging blow for Christian service providers. So we need to pray into that. I think the public, groups like Ofsted, need a lot of education on these issues. They have no idea what Christian ministry means and why it's important, and the invaluable service that Christians provide as a social welfare net for society.
And Tim, I think we've got a great question that's come in from Sandra via Facebook. She said, why is there so much ignorance of Christian values when this country would fall apart without Christian ministry? And I think there is, we've got to really think about that, and our voice, and really as the church, how is it that we've rendered ourselves to become a social service in a sense, just delivering lots of good works without talking about the message that we really believe in? And I think we need to find our voice. We need to talk about why it is that we serve and so love God that we would serve others, pour out our time, pour out our money, pour out all that we have for the good of those around us. Why? Because we love them, because we want to show them the love of the Lord Jesus Christ and what it means to really live for him. And that part of what it really means to live for him is the truth of the whole gospel. And the truth of the whole gospel is not just personal salvation, not just that each one of us has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but it's the how now to live. How does he want us to live? You know, when we know his law that says marriage is between a man and a woman and children are best raised within this construct, and this really works for a flourishing society, then that brings joy to the people, that brings hope. And these are the kind of things that we need to be bold about.
Do you think that people really don't know that Christians believe that marriage is between a man and a woman and that abortion is wrong? I mean, do you think they really don't know that?
Well, I think we have there's a confused sound. I think we very often think that in order to somehow make palatable the gospel, there are things that we shouldn't talk about much. So I think it's almost as if at the moment we can generally talk about God, we can talk about blessing, we can talk about even about Jesus and loving Jesus. But talking about the moral code that flows from that, what repentance looks like, what the turnaround looks like, what following him means, what the beauty of an ordered life as God.
And if we never actually teach about abortion or sexual ethics, then people assume we agree with the culture. Is that the point you're making?
But also sometimes, or when we have the opportunity to speak about it, we don't open our voice. And sadly also that we have the church that is public. The voice that we hear is sometimes muddled about that. So what you will have, often taking a lot of the media space, is people that call themselves Christians and gay Christians fighting for gay marriage, let's say, or fighting for women's rights for abortion. And they are given, and then it's very hard for the public who don't know Jesus at all, what Christianity means, to say, well, is that Christianity? I don't understand what Christianity is anymore. And so we've got to really find our voice as the church in this nation, because we know that the real believers in this nation, who are a relatively small but still significant number, if we could yet find our voice and speak of what the truth of holiness is, what true repentance means, to follow the good laws and the holy laws of Jesus, then we would promote the happiness of the people, actually, because these laws are so good for us all. Imagine a world where all the children that need to be placed were placed in homes with a married mother and father that was stable and good. And just imagine imagine the rescue plan that we could have for all those children longing for such homes. It would be quite amazing. Just imagine a world Whereas instead of today, on a working day, 850 babies or 550 babies every day, we were saving those babies that are going to be aborted today. Do we not think that the church is capable of doing this in this country? That would then be a church that speaks life, life to the world, a church that speaks a hope to the world. And this on all these things, on all the confusion things. Who am I? Where have I come from? And what do I find my identity in? All of this stuff, the church has clear answers for, and that's what we need to be speaking about. Great.
Well, I think that's a fantastic note to end as we sort of close up on time today. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. We welcome your feedback and comments. Always interesting to hear from you. And we're looking to do this about once a week on Fridays. Tomorrow was a bank holiday, so we've brought it forward to Thursday this week. But next week, we hope to do this about 1 p.m. again, and to chat through some of the topics. If there are particular topics you'd like to see raised as well, do let us know, and look forward to connecting with you again going forwards. Thank you very much.